God being a mass murderer and giving children cancer and nailing his son to a plank and all that. Now the last and most important is the historicity of Jesus Christ. Was Jesus Christ God? Did Jesus Christ raise from the dead? What is the evidence for the resurrected Jesus? Are the Gospels reliable historical texts? Now from time to time, I do run across the occasional atheist that denies that Jesus was even a historical person. Nonsense. Even among secular historians, there is an overwhelming abundance of acknowledgement of Jesus as a historical person. Not only through the Gospels or other New Testament texts, but non-religious texts as well. You might be familiar, probably heard this one before, the Jewish historian Josephus talks about Jesus Christ. The Roman historian Tacitus, he writes, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Mara bar Serapion, who was a philosopher at the time, around 70 AD, he writes a letter to his son, and he references the murder of Socrates, the burning of Pythagoras, and the execution of the wise king of the Jews. It's also relevant to note here that there are no Christian themes in his letters, and that he is believed to be a pagan. And these are just 3 examples. There's dozens more like this. So to deny the historical Jesus is to deny truth. You can't get onto Christians for putting their fingers in their ear about science stuff, which they do, don't get me wrong. If you're also going to put your fingers in the ear and be like, no, Jesus was made up, he's make-believe, it's not true. I respect so much more the argument that Jesus was not God and he did not rise from the dead, then Jesus did not exist. At least one of those has some intellectual backing to it. So I figure, you know what, we're this deep in, let's go ahead and talk about the heavy stuff. Let's talk about the resurrection of Jesus, since that's really the crutch that all Christianity leans on. So what is the evidence of the resurrected Jesus? I would think, was Jesus' tomb empty, as described in the Gospel? That's probably the best place to start. Historian Giza Vermes, who's a secular Jew, not a Christian, a Jew who doesn't even believe in the divinity of Jesus, he writes, in the end, when every argument has been considered and weighed, the only conclusion acceptable to the historian must be that the women who set out to pay their last respects to Jesus found to their consternation not a body but an empty tomb. As recorded in the Gospels, it is women who first discovered Jesus' tomb was empty. This is so important and such an overlooked detail in the resurrection of Jesus. In the time of Christ, women were considered second-class citizens, unreliable, untrustworthy, and their testimony certainly didn't weigh as much as a man. And a huge problem that Jesus had with some of the religious leaders at the time was that he humanized women, especially and even the treatment of what would be considered a lower-class woman or a lower type of woman. Yet the Gospel accounts that women discovered the empty tomb. If you were trying to start or perpetuate a hoax at the time of Christ about an empty tomb or a resurrected Jesus, the absolute worst thing you could do is give that first credibility to a woman. It's either a really stupid move on the part of the writers, or it's true. In the same way, I often hear that the Gospel accounts are not exactly identical, as if this somehow is evidence of their unreliability. Rubbish. And the reason I say that is because discrepancies among eyewitness accounts are to be expected to some extent. If you think I'm being unreasonable, consider this. When a police officer reports to a crime and they begin interviewing people, what is the first thing they do? They separate everyone. And they go to all of them and they interview them. Can you tell me in detail what happened? As much detail as you can. I want to know the facts, blah, blah, blah. They hear different versions and variations of the same event. There's usually the main factual event that happened and variations in the detail. One might say that a perpetrator of an attack punched the guy 3 times. Another witness says the guy, he ran up to him, he tripped on his way, he ran up there and he punched him 4 times. The point is, they both saw the perpetrator punch this other guy. The identity and number of the witnesses differ in various Gospels, as does also their testimony. If the empty tomb story had been manufactured by the primitive church to demonstrate the reality of the resurrection of Jesus, one would have expected a uniform and foolproof account attributed to patently reliable witnesses. Now, an empty tomb is one thing, but the Gospels report Jesus' appearance not only to the disciples, but to 500 other people. That the followers of Jesus, and later also Paul, had experiences of resurrection is, in my opinion, a historical fact. I do not consider deliberate frauds as a useful explanation. Many of these people spent the rest of their life proclaiming to have seen the Lord resurrected, and many of them would die because of this. Gerd Ludman, an agnostic, writes, "It may be considered historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after the death of Jesus, in which Jesus appeared to them as the resurrected Christ." Historians that acknowledge the claims of the resurrection but deny that those events actually happened, they have claimed that it possibly was mass hysteria to the disciples and maybe some of the others that claim to have seen Jesus. So that is to say that historians acknowledge as historical fact at least the claims of the resurrected Jesus. Dale Allison writes, "One person can hallucinate, but 12 at the same time, and dozens over an extended period of time? These are legitimate questions, and waving the magical wand of mass hysteria will not make them vanish." It's worth noting, too, that James, the brother of Jesus, is noted as being a skeptic of Jesus' divinity. He was particularly distraught after the crucifixion of Jesus. After the attested appearance of Jesus to him, he would go on to die, claiming he personally saw Jesus resurrected. It's also worth noting that not all of the accounts of the resurrected Jesus came from the apostles. Paul was a self-appointed persecutor of Christians before his conversion. After Paul's miraculous conversion on the road to Damascus, most Christians that were aware of him at the time thought he was lying and trying to trick them out of hiding so that he could kill them. This point was even acknowledged by a man named Anthony Flew. He is a well-known philosopher and lifelong opponent to Christians. He writes this, "The evidence of Paul is certainly important and strong, precisely because he was a convert. He was not a prior believer. He was not an apostle. Rather, he had been an active opponent. I think this has to be accepted as one of the most powerful bits of evidence that there is, precisely because he was converted by his vision." Now I'm just scratching at the surface of all this, but what does all of this mean? Early Christianity offers us a missing body, plus visions of several individuals, plus collective apparition, plus the sense of a dead man's presence, plus the conversion vision of at least one hostile outsider, the Apostle Paul. Taken as a whole, this is, on any account, a remarkable, even extraordinary confluence of events and claims. If there is a good, substantial parallel to the entire series, I have yet to run across it. Now, when you take all this together from the broad, down to the more specific, down to the historicity of Jesus Christ, if the miraculous events of the resurrection prove to be true as the evidence suggests, then the implications for us living today are immeasurable. And I'm sorry guys, I swear, I was not planning to make this video on the evidence of God. I really wasn't. But to counter the absurdity that there is no proof, there's no evidence of God or evidence of Jesus, is just absurd. And that Jesus says, "Believe just because I say so," as Ezekiel says in the episode of The Boys, is ridiculous. It's not true. It's intellectually dishonest. It's a misrepresentation of who Jesus is and what Jesus said. And don't get me wrong, fundamentalist evangelical Christians are usually the worst purveyors of this type of thing. But in this case, Ezekiel, the show The Boys, they're doing it pretty badly here. This video isn't even about The Boys anymore. I'm gonna have to change the title now to The Boys and something else. This video is already long enough. I really wanted to get to Butcher's whole speech, his little mini tirade about God being a mass murderer and giving children cancer and nailing his son to a plank and all that. Because honestly, I find that to be a much more interesting discussion anyway, because I understand that it echoes a lot of how non-Christians feel towards God. Why do bad things happen? Why would an all-powerful, all-good God allow these things to continue and so on? But we'll have to wait till next time. I usually make video series like this kind of in bulk, but I'm going to wait this time because I want to see some of the comments. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of doozies down there, both from Christians and atheists, but I want to sift through some of them and pull hopefully some good questions, both from Christians and atheists, and address some of them maybe in the next video. And hopefully the next video will be a little bit more focused directly on the Boys content itself. I just couldn't take that. That was too absurd for me to take. I'm sorry, everyone. It is what it is. Here we are. That's it for now. Like if you enjoyed. One like equals one prayer. So make sure you do that. Subscribe so you'll be notified the next part of this. Check out Patreon. I'll do my best to try and post these up a little early for patrons that might be interested in it. And I'll catch you in the next video. Take care, everyone.